My father refused to walk me down the aisle because his adored daughter had an opening party that day, but he called me desperate when I got a replacement. For a long time, I always knew my parents loved my older sister Vicky more than me. She was the planned daughter while I was the result of an accidental pregnancy just 10 months later. They probably didn't even want me but decided to keep the pregnancy anyway. My mother's parents had passed away before I was born, but my father's parents were very much alive, so they took on a significant role in my upbringing. Sadness and failure were constants in my life, providing the love and support I often felt I lacked from my own parents. I remember so many times when my parents left me behind with my grandparents and only took me back to my sister on trips. When I was young, I didn't care because it was fun to live with my grandparents. But as I grew up, when I was 6 or 7, I realized how unfair it was. But my problem wasn't only with my parents, it was also with my sister Vicky. Although I didn't harbor a grudge against Vicky, I couldn't help but feel like an unwanted compliment in the family. She also knew it and made me feel like a stranger every day in my own home. I always competed with her for everything, whether it was for grades, the attention of our parents, or even the smallest accomplishments. It felt like a constant battle for validation, and I was always on the losing side because my parents always preferred her. As a result, I felt really inferior and we never fully understood each other. Our relationship seemed more like a perpetual competition, with her always coming out victorious. On one occasion, she wanted to be friends with a group of girls, but because she was a nerd, she was afraid to approach them. One of the girls and I had art classes together, so I introduced myself to the rest of the group and we all used to hang out together. Vicky was so jealous of this that she made my parents talk to me to include her. Also, whenever I was with them, I tried to avoid conflict, but my mother called me selfish, while my father said she was my sister and I should take care of her. I reluctantly accepted and introduced Vicky to the rest of the girls. Now, Vicky doesn't have many friends, so she may seem too enthusiastic. I was constantly trying to impress the girls in our group, often becoming annoyed. Despite her efforts, she found it difficult to find her place among them, and the tension between Vicky and the other girls was always palpable. For example, one of the girls was interested in a boy, so Vicky took it upon herself to approach the boy and let him know that she liked the girl. He laughed because he was not interested and went and told everyone, which embarrassed the girl. After this, the girls told me clearly that they didn't want her to join our meetings, so I accepted. However, Vicky didn't accept it. She threw a tantrum when she found out that the girls wanted nothing to do with her and insisted to our parents that I shouldn't spend time with these bad girls either, since I was her sister and should defend her. I refused and told her it was her fault that I didn't. They wanted to be friends with her, but my parents, as always, supported her. They gave me a talk about how Vicky had no bad intentions and that I should try to convince the girls to forgive Vicky, but that if they didn't, then I should stay away from them too. I refused and stood firm. I liked hanging out with them and, unlike Vicky, I wasn't going to sacrifice my friendships in any way. I told my parents that I had had enough and that it wasn't my responsibility to find friends for Vicky, and what my parents did was follow us. I told my parents that I had had enough and that it wasn't my responsibility to find friends for Vicky. My parents got mad and turned their backs on me for weeks, but I'm glad I stood my ground. This group of girls has remained my friends to this day, and they are basically like my sisters. I have cried with them, laughed with them, and shared some of the most significant moments of my life. That wasn't the only reason Vicky came to hate me. There was also another incident with a boy she was in love with, a boy I had no idea about, and who sat in some classes with me because we were friends. He tried to invite me to the prom, but I politely declined because I was already going with someone I liked. Later, when Vicky found out, she made a big fuss about it by telling my parents how she always told me the things she wanted, and that she was in love with the boy, knowing what she had been feeling for months. She used a lot of unpleasant words that no one should tell their own sister, and told my parents how she wished I wasn't her sister. My mother stood by her, telling me that what she had done was wrong and that as a sister, I should respect the girl's code. I tried to tell them that I wasn't even interested in the boy and that I had turned down his invitation, so she was free to ask him if she wanted to. But Vicky refused to let it pass. Looking back, I think she knew the guy would have rejected her anyway. So she just wanted to get even with me because she had invited me instead of her. Once, my dad took me out for ice cream, telling me he wanted to spend time with me as a father and daughter. This had never happened before, so I was really happy. However, he started asking me a lot of questions as if my boyfriend and I were being careful, if my boyfriend came from a good family, or if we used drugs. I was shocked by his line of questions and asked him what he meant by all that. That's when my dad revealed that Vicky had been making up stories, telling my parents for months that I was on drugs and drinking alcohol with my boyfriend. This was a complete lie, and I showed my dad my phone to verify that Vicky was lying. Later, when my dad confronted her about all the lies, she tried to justify that no one our age just spends time with a guy and that I was hiding everyone's stuff. I was so angry that I yelled at her for trying to create an unnecessary problem and told her it wasn't my fault she didn't have anyone to date, but I needed to move on with my life. Vicky didn't accept it, and if you are liking it, was so angry that Vicky made things up about me that I yelled at her for trying to create an unnecessary problem and told her it wasn't my fault that she had no one to date. But I needed to move on with my life. Vicky didn't accept it and hit me. This came out of nowhere as she had never been physically violent before. My nose started to bleed as I fell to the floor, grabbing my face in pain. My parents rushed me to the hospital and all the time begged me not to file a complaint against Vicky. They said I would ruin her life. While I was sitting in the back seat, grabbing my face, Vicky didn't even worry or apologize. Later, when the teacher asked me about the incident, I told her the truth and she called Child Protection Services. My parents were furious with me for involving Child Protection Services, seeing it as a betrayal of family loyalty. In their eyes, Vicky's actions were seen as a mere accident, not justifying such a drastic intervention. They pleaded with the authorities, insisting that Vicky was not a danger to me, that her actions were out of character. In the end, Vicky was released but warned my parents that they would be closely monitoring our situation in case other accidents occurred. As you can imagine, Vicky was really affected, just like my parents. Later, my parents told me they were disappointed in me for trying to ruin my sister's life. My mother started crying and told me how I was tearing the family apart by involving other people. My father's disappointment was palpable. His words were always full of reproach. As I questioned my decision to escalate the situation, I told them firmly that I wanted Vicky out of my life, and they agreed. I felt guilty for involving the authorities, but for the first time, I felt safe in my own home. Once Vicky had been formally warned, my parents had a separate conversation with her, and since that day, she stopped talking to me completely. I preferred this much more than having her constantly playing dead or trying to insert herself into my life. When my grandparents learned of this incident, they asked me to pack my things so I could live with them for the rest of high school. They informed my parents, who did not protest much, so I went to live with my grandparents. Unlike my parents' home, I felt safe and loved there. The remaining days of high school went well, and I made lasting memories with my friends. My parents never visited me or called during that time. I knew they were happy with their beloved daughter, so I never tried to contact them, even though it hurt that they could rule me out so easily, as if I were nothing. When I graduated from high school, my parents made the day about Vicky. They didn't even congratulate me or approach me. I felt like a stranger to them. Although it hurt that I could be dismissed as easily as if it were nothing, when I graduated from high school, my parents made the day about Vicky. They didn't even congratulate me or approach me. I felt like I was a stranger to them. However, my grandparents were there and scolded my parents for being so obvious about their favoritism. I don't know what my grandfather told them, but my dad then approached me later. I later discovered that I was accepted into a good university with a full scholarship. I was very happy about that because I was afraid to ask my parents for financial help. I informed my grandparents about this, and they invited me out to dinner at a good restaurant. Our relatives found out early and joined in the congratulations. I thought some of them might have told my parents, but they had no idea about all this. Instead of feeling happy about it, my mother called me the next day to tell me that Vicky had locked herself in her room crying because she had not been accepted to any college, and that I was consciously trying to make my sister feel bad about her grades. Speaking to all of our relatives, she told me this was all my fault because Vicky was apparently depressed after the incident with Child Protective Services, which had pushed her to get bad grades. I was so incredibly devastated that my own mother could blame me for something like that. So that was the last time I talked to her. My grandparents helped me move into my dorm because my high school boyfriend's college was far away from me. We were done, so I went into college single. The breakup had been difficult, but I was excited to meet new people. This is where I met Rob. He and I were both freshmen, and we both spent half of our days in the library. Rob was different from anyone I had met before. He is a quiet person and liked to study, just like me. We quickly found commonalities in our shared love for college. As the weeks turned into months, our friendship blossomed into something deeper, and I realized that I had developed feelings for Rob that went beyond simple friendship. Being extroverted, I was quite direct about my feelings for Rob, and was surprised to learn that he felt the same way. We started dating and have been together for 8 years. My grandparents have met Rob, and they just love him. I have met Rob's parents, who also treat me like their own daughter. Rob's mother has even confessed to me how she has always wished to have a daughter, so she is glad that Rob met a wonderful person like me. To be honest, this is the first time I've been surrounded by family members who appreciate me and don't hold a grudge. I've told Rob stories from my childhood, and he listens to me and knows what my relationship with Vicky is like. Over the past 8 years, my parents have barely contacted me, except to send me an occasional birthday message if they remembered. But that's all. Recently, Rob and I got engaged. He proposed to me while we were together,